Okay, I think it's a bad habit to simply blurt out ideas as if they're authoritative, especially if there's no clue of whether or not they're true or where the ideas even came from. For example, when you think about Cain, as in Cain and Abel Cain, most of the time Cain arises in a conversation, I realize that it's some kind of jab being taken at Cain without any consideration, any real concrete information whatsoever. Hopefully, this will help avoid being distracted by that kind of silliness. Okay, let's talk about Cain for a minute. All right, so he's mentioned about let's say less than 20 times between Genesis through Malachi, Matthew through Revelation. He's mentioned less than 20 times. Here's a few things that I've seen about him that was said negative. I haven't seen anything other than this that's said about Cain in a negative context. In Genesis chapter 4, it says that he was wroth when his sacrifice was rejected, so he had a bad attitude about it. He was pissed off, whatever word you want to use. It also says that he killed his brother. He murdered his brother. When he was approached about murdering his brother, okay, he he denied it. He lied, basically. So these are things that are said negative about him. In Hebrews, he's placed in somewhat of a negative connotation because it's a mention of how his sacrifice wasn't accepted and Abel's was accepted. Okay, in First John chapter 3, he's actually referred to as being of the wicked one. Okay, so according to John, Cain was not on the side of righteousness. He was not on the side of the Most High, etc. Okay. Another thing is in Jude chapter 1. Well, there's only one chapter of Jude actually, but it talks about the way of Cain. And when it talks about the way of Cain, it's not a flattering thing. It's talking about going a bad direction, an evil direction. Okay, so these are the things that I've seen in that context that have been said about Cain. Okay, if those of you who look at the book of Enoch as being authoritative, he talks about how the voice, this is in Enoch 22, he talks about how the voice of Abel is crying out, accusing Cain until Cain's seed is vanished from the earth, or something like that. Okay, that sounds kind of bad. In Jasher chapter 1, it says that the fruit that Cain offered was inferior. In other words, he didn't take the best fruit he had, he took the crappy fruit. Now that's what Jasher says. For those who look at the book of Jasher as authoritative. In Jasher it also says that when Cain had his son Enoch, that he named him Enoch because the name Enoch has something to do with being given rest by Yahweh. Okay. Now I remember that Cain was cursed to be a wanderer. But by the time he had Enoch, he wasn't wandering. You can't wander and build a city at the same time. So the book of Jasher talks about how him building a city was because Yahweh had pretty much given him rest or peace, so he didn't have to wander around anymore. Is what the book of Jasher says. In Jubilees, it's interesting. Okay, so back to Jasher. Before I go to Jubilees, Jasher chapter 2 says that Lamech, who is Cain's grandson, maybe great grandson, Lamech accidentally killed Cain. So in Genesis, it says Lamech killed somebody. According to Jasher, Lamech killed Cain with an arrow, and it's presented as Yahweh pretty much giving Cain a payback for what happened to Abel. That's what Jasher says. However, in the book of Jubilees, in the 4th chapter, it says that Cain's house collapsed on him and he was killed by a stone, which is payback for him killing Abel with a stone. So depending on, I don't know if you want to believe either one of those, but I'm just kind of looking up and trying to see where did this negative stuff about Cain come from, right? Or some of the things I hear. Okay, so let's talk about Cain. Let's talk about some things that we can research and verify, or at least have some type of backup for saying. All right, he was a tiller of the ground. Adam was a tiller of the ground. You know, so I guess he might have learned from his pop. It's not far-fetched. He offered fruit of the ground. He got mad about being rejected. He killed his brother. He lied. He built a city. He named a city after his son. These are all things Cain did. He had a grandson or a great grandson named Lamech. Lamech is the first guy who is noted as having more than one wife. He had a son named Jabal. That's probably not the right pronunciation, but his one of his sons. And this guy was noted as the first person to dwell in tents and herd cattle. All right. He had another son who's noted as the first guy to work on harps and organs, which means this dude was a musician. And seeing how early in history it was, he's being presented as maybe the first guy. First guy. He had another son, and this guy worked with brass and iron, and he's being presented as the original brass and iron guy. All right. So a lot of things came from Cain, or a lot of things happened with Cain and with Cain's descendants that are being presented as the first time these things happened. Okay. Now, when people vilify things and they say, well, when things are not originally seen in creation or what have you, then it's, you look at Cain's lineage and it's negative because look who it came from. It came from Cain, and that's why it's bad. I hear these things, okay? But the interesting thing, the stupid thing about it is that method is only used when the person doing it wants to make something look negative. It's never used across the board. I'm going to say almost never. Okay? I'll give you a perfect example. All right? It says that Cain offered fruit from the ground, right? Some people try to make it seem negative, but if you read the Torah, what you realize is the offerings that are offered during the Moedim include fruit from the ground, grain, wheat, all kind of stuff. Okay? So if this is a negative thing, well, if it came from Cain, it's negative, then that doesn't make any sense. Because why would Yahweh literally instruct his people to do something that's negative? Doesn't make any sense, right? Okay. What about the fact that, let's see what else here. Cain built a city. He's the first person noted as building a city. Does that mean building a city is bad, is evil? What are we talking about? No. No one has ever said building a city is evil. We all live in cities, and nobody says, well, I'm not going to say nobody, because there are people who say living in a city is evil. So let me take that back. Okay? But it is not a general belief that living in the city is evil because Cain started it. I never heard that before. Okay? What about naming your city after a person? He named his city after his son. Is it evil because Cain did it? I mean, it was never done before Cain. It started with Cain. Does that mean it's evil? No. Okay. What about the fact that his son, his great-great-grandson was the first guy to do tents, live in tents and herd cattle? Well, that came through the lineage of Cain. So herding cattle is evil. Having a tent is evil. It started with Cain. It didn't start with Abel. It didn't start with Seth. It started with Cain. Okay? But nobody's going to say that's evil. Well, I got to take that back. I'm sure somebody says that's evil. But it's not a general assumption that it's evil because it came from Cain. Okay? Or Cain's descendants, or the lineage of Cain, or any of that. What about harps and organs, musicians and instruments? Okay? When you look at tents and cattle, didn't Abraham live in tents? Didn't Abraham leave the city and move out of the city and live in tents? Well, if you in a city, Cain's the first guy to build a city. If you live in a tent, his grandson's the first guy that came up with living in tents. What are we doing? Okay? One of Cain's grandsons, which is Lamech's son, was the first guy to do music. So what? Music is bad? Music is evil? Wait a minute. David did music. The biggest book in the Bible is a book of songs. The logic don't work. It don't fit. Okay? Another one of Cain's sons or grandsons was the first guy to be a brass and iron guy, work with brass and iron. So what does that mean? Anything that's worked out with brass and iron is evil because it came from Cain? Okay? How about this? God allowed. You ever hear that? He allowed. Okay? So what? Did he allow people to build cities? Cities is actually bad, but he allowed it. Or naming a city after a person is actually bad, but he allowed it. Right? Living in tents or herding cattle is actually bad because it came from the lineage of Cain, but God allowed it. All this stuff sounds stupid as heck, okay? But most of the time, when you're presented with an idea where it says, well, this came through the lineage of Cain, and so therefore it should be perceived as evil or wicked or not the way Yahweh intended it, or whatever you want to say, you can't pick out one thing and make it true, but then exclude all the other things. If it came through the lineage, if by coming through the lineage of Cain, it's evil, especially if it wasn't what was originally being done. All the things that I named were not originally being done. Okay? So if one thing is evil, it's all evil. If that's what makes something evil. If not being originally done and coming through Cain makes something evil, then all those things are evil. Okay? Keep that in mind because you're going to hear it.